Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behavior as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm returning to a subject I've covered before. That subject is influence. And my guest, Dr. Zoe Chance, is obsessed with it. She teaches a course on it at Yale, and she's just written a fabulous book called Influence Is Your Superpower: The Science of Winning Hearts, Sparking Change, and Making Good Things Happen. As you can tell from that title, it's a really enjoyable read about how we can all make our lives better by awakening a superpower that we're all born with, but we're then taught to suppress. We're taught to follow rules, to wait our turn, and not to make waves. If we want to be more effective in whatever field we're in, at work and in our personal lives, then having more influence is incredibly useful. It's also very powerful if we want to minimize human risk and get the best out of our potential. The book is a lot of fun, as was my discussion with Zoe. So please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Zoe Chance on influence. Zoe, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you so much, Christian.
I am so excited to have you here because I have been following you on social media for, I don't know, it's COVID time, so it could be decades, could be years, who knows? But either way, I've been tracking. Can you just give us a little sort of pen portrait?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Zoe Chance. I'm a professor at Yale School of Management, where I teach the most popular class. It's called Mastering Influence and Persuasion. I've just written a book based on the principles of these class and then going deeper into the science. The book is called Influence Is Your Superpower. And what makes me different from a lot of my colleagues is that I came from actual real world marketing. I was a brand manager at Mattel on the Barbie brand before I came to academia.
And I've got to unpick that, Zoe. How does that take you into academia?
Well, it's not that different from your path, I think, right? Starting out doing more of the implementation. You busted me there. Nice one. You've turned it back on me already. Yeah. And then doing more of the investigation. I guess like you, and I think I'm just going to guess like a lot of your listeners, I was a big nerd. And I mean that in the best way. I really wanted to understand specifically why weren't things going well when I expected them to go well. And I had frustrations like with my bosses where my job was customer marketing. So I was supposed to influence kids, but I had to spend half of my time trying to influence senior leaders at Mattel. And I would do all this painstaking analysis and present this perfectly laid out case, and they'd be like, I don't really like the color. No, horse is never going to make it. You got to start over. And we'd have scrap the toy line and have to redo the whole thing in 6 months instead of a year. So I wanted to know, how do I help people make better decisions? And I came to first MIT and then Harvard. I worked with Dan Ariely, who was my first PhD advisor.
So you focused on this area of influence. How can we be better at influencing other people, and obviously implicitly what influences us as well? What's your kind of jumping off point into that space? Because obviously it's a massive topic where you sort of go, well, the curiosity you talked about is I want to understand why things I'm saying and communicating aren't landing and vice versa. How did you start to navigate that world?
So it started with a book that a friend of mine gave me called Influence by Robert Cialdini, which has been a Bible of influence for so many of us. And this was my first anything where I was reading about academic research in this area of how do people influence each other, interpersonal influence, which is different from sales and marketing, right? Where it's arm's length influence. So I got curious about that. And then I came back to school to study behavioral economics, which became much more widely known after my advisor, Dan Ariely, published his book, Predictably Irrational, on this. And lots of people now are excited about behavioral economics, and that makes me so happy.
Can you talk a little bit about how you teach your students? Because in the book, you pick lots of examples of classes you've taught and what's happened as a result of that. You seem to have a really, really, and I guess it's logical given the subject, but you have a really engaging kind of style and the way you try and influence them. How would you describe your teaching style?
Thank you. My goal as a teacher has shifted over time, but what my goal is now is to be hosting the class rather than teaching the class. And I used to say that my job was teaching Jedi mind tricks. That sounded really cool, and it's not completely wrong, but the essence of it is absolutely horrible because you're saying I teach people to manipulate other people, which is not at all what I try to do. And I'm not a Jedi, right? Like I can't actually move objects with my mind or whatever. When Danny Meyer, the restaurateur who's behind some big restaurants here in the United States, like 11 Madison Park and big fast food chain Shake Shack, came to Yale School of Management, he said, listen, y'all, although he didn't say y'all, all of you are in the hospitality business. You think you're in some other business, but you're actually in the hospitality business. And for me as a teacher, at first I was like, oh yeah, you're talking to them. And then I asked, what if you're talking to me? And what would it look like to be hosting this class instead of teaching it? And I changed everything. Biggest thing that I changed is that now there's no attendance policy. I used to not only, of course, take attendance every day, but if you missed more than one class, your grade starts declining just bit by bit with every class that you miss.
Regardless of your output, right? That's a metric.
Regardless of your output. Yeah, it's one of the components. But now I said, listen, if I'm hosting the class, nobody requires their guests to be there, right? That would be horrible. You're just happy.
That would like suck as a party, right?
It would suck. It would suck. You have to go to this party or we're going to punish you. So I only teach people who want to be there. And because I have taken the pressure off and they want to be there, each day about 95% of the enrolled students end up showing up for the class. And of course, I have to make it fun and interesting and engaging. And like you were saying, do a bunch of the influence-y stuff. But this just illustrates one simple principle that's core to my teachings, which is not trying to manipulate people and not focusing on transactions, but shifting into collaboration. So from manipulation to collaboration is the goal.
And I think that's really interesting because I love the sort of mindset here because obviously that feels better from the student's perspective, right? Suddenly we've shifted from this zone of here's somebody that's kind of checking up on us, policing what we do, almost North Korean, right? But I like that, and then I think about, well, what does that do to you? And the answer is suddenly you're shifting because the pressure is back on you. Because suddenly they're not there under duress. They're there because they want to be there. So if you're producing a terrible product, the service that you're delivering is not great or it's not interesting, they're not going to show up. So suddenly you've put yourself out there in a really interesting way. But I think from a creativity and a getting the best out of you perspective, yeah, sure, it's stressful as hell, right? Because there's no longer a captive audience. But that must be really interesting, right? Because it must drive you to spaces you possibly wouldn't have gone to without that.
So, Christian, I was trying really, really hard before, but I was trying on the wrong things. But I was focused on the wrong things. And in the past, I would have, for example, spent all of my time on slides, preparing perfect slides to have exactly, I don't know, whatever perfect slides are in PowerPoint world. And students are coming into the class and I'm dealing with the technology and figuring out music and everything. And they're trying to talk to me. And I'm like, yeah, we after class. I'll talk to you after class. Just like
I got a show to put on here, right? And you are just going to consume the show.
Yeah, I am the star. You are the audience. Sit back in your seat, little lady, right? But when you're hosting, you can't have somebody come to the door and you're like, okay, I'll talk to you later. So people show up at the door, and it's not just me, but my TAs, because their job is hosting with me. They show up early, and their whole job is just welcoming people. They're like Walmart greeters in my class. So they welcome people, they make small talk, and they check in on somebody sitting by themselves and just ask them, how's their day? How's their weekend? I try to learn everybody's names as quickly as I can. And on Zoom, one of my TA's jobs is smiling, which sounds so silly, but it makes a big difference to have somebody in the room who's got a big freaking grin on their face.
So like in the Brady Bunch box on Zoom, right? There is at least one of those, right, is looking like they're enjoying themselves.
Yes. Even if they're not, they've got to put on the smile. And then I stick around after class. So that's also part of the hosting. And there are other elements too. But I've been so surprised teaching on Zoom how much we can create the same kind of very casual atmosphere of just chit-chatting after class when, somebody has questions, wants to ask your advice. And I used to stay in the room, and now I stay in the Zoom room if we're online. And it's honestly just as intimate as if we were in the classroom. And sometimes it feels a little bit more intimate because we can see each other's space. And we see each other maybe not at our best. Like you and I are talking and nobody else can see us, but I don't have makeup on. My sweater is falling off my shoulder and I keep pulling it up. And like, here's my tiny office that's 3 feet by 3 feet. Excuse me. Yeah. No, you're in feet. No.
Feet's good. Feet's good. Don't
Germany,
worry.
you're in meters. It's 1 square meter. And this is it. Like, this is my real life, and what I know about you is your lamp.
Right.
But it's more than I would know about you if you came to my class.
I mean, this strikes me as picking up a theme that if one of the reasons that we need the book and the sort of research that you're doing is that many of the constructs that we have in place are actually undermining our natural abilities. And you talk about how we grow up and we grow up with certain abilities, superpowers, I guess, in your language, that are then kind of taken away from us because we're required to behave in a particular way. We have certain structures that almost stifle challenges and stifle our ability to influence other people. And so it really struck me that you were kind of compensating, and that's a great example of sort of going, some of the structures we have in place aren't necessarily fit for purpose to get the best out of us.
Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of misconceptions that I started to learn only when I was reading the private journals of these hundreds of students who were coming through my class, and they're reflecting on the challenges. And
with their permission, we should add, right? No, this is not just
I say private journals, but they're turning them in for class.
Right.
So private between them and me. And one of the big surprises that I had is that almost everyone on earth is a people pleaser. Not all of us realize that we are people pleasers. And sometimes it doesn't sink in until we start to practice asking more often. We start to practice saying no more often. We find that both of those things are so uncomfortable because we don't want to bother anybody and we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And these are, to use an MBA stereotype, like even like big white jockey dudes working on Wall Street. And it still feels uncomfortable for many of them to get a busy bartender's attention or something like this. I was talking to someone yesterday who's made more money than most of us could possibly imagine ever making, and what you even do when you have that much money. And he was saying he's comfortable in business because you can reciprocate. When you make deals, there's a reciprocal arrangement, it's fine. But he would never send his food back at a restaurant because the people at the restaurant are already working really hard and there's nothing he can do for them. So
wow,
it's interesting, right? So the deep-seated discomfort with trying to influence other people is this thing that we imagine, oh, it's a little uncomfortable for me, but it's actually everybody. Influence is uncomfortable for everybody. And then you talked to Vanessa Bonds on this show last year, I think. So you and some of your listeners who happen to hear that episode will know she has great work finding that people are 2 or 3 times more likely to say yes than you think that they will be. People are so much nicer than you expect, so much nicer than you realize. And it's because of the same thing that you have, that you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And also we are happy to make each other happy. So especially when we approach each other with warmth and playfulness, we succeed much more often than we expect and much more often than we fail.
And I think it's interesting because you talked about the Jedi mind trick piece. We kind of conflate influencing people with manipulating them, con artistry. So there is this massive negative association with being good at getting other people to do things. And what you nicely debunk is actually that's okay, right? And actually, it's not an unhealthy thing, provided you don't push it to the extremity. And there are clearly things you're not encouraging people to go out and con people. But I think there's something interesting there that we shy away from that, and therefore miss opportunities that actually it's not even like we'd have to strive that hard to get. As you explain in the book, that these things are there available if only we could overcome that hurdle.
Yeah. And so absolutely, when we are relating with people in a collaborative way and we want to be together. We want to talk together. We want to work together. That's where long-term success comes from. And it's not from whatever the short-term transaction is that you're looking for. But you mentioned that it's okay to live your life in this transactional way. And I know you come from a background where you've delved deeply into ethics. And I want to ask you an ethical question. This has nothing to do with my book, but I'm curious about your perspective on a pickup artist, male pickup artist, who goes and meets women, woos them, beds them, tells them exactly straight up what's going on. There's nothing like, I'm not interested in a long-term thing. This is just for fun. And these women, because they're human, end up falling for this person. And maybe I shouldn't have even introduced it as a pickup artist, because maybe I should have just said human being, right? But human being who doesn't want a relationship and yet pursues liaisons and then ends up breaking hearts. Is it his responsibility, those broken hearts, if he communicated clearly?
I find this fascinating because I read all the books, but you read the books by Neil Strauss.
I have the game.
Right. And I'll put links to all of these things in the show notes for people that are interested in following up on it.
It's so much fun. Wait, let's just bookmark for a sec how fun the game is. That Neil Strauss is a Rolling Stone reporter. So he's regular journalist guy doing a story about pickup artists. And then he goes so deep into this that he ends up becoming one of them and training people to be. And he is this short, skinny, bald, white Jewish guy that has just never been he's never been a chick magnet. And he learns these skills and he can have women falling for him left and right. So there's your advertisement, Neil Strauss.
That was perfect. I think at the time I read it, we're going back a few years now, because I think it's sort of early, probably about 10, 12 years ago, I'm guessing. And I originally read those books, I'll be honest, right, partly because I was like, I can get some useful tips here. And partly because I was like, I think this was an early example of me being fascinated about what makes us tick. And I guess probably implicitly, why did certain things that I was doing not work? And let's learn from someone that clearly succeeds. And so my gut reaction on that stuff was to kind of go, this is really interesting. If it works, it must be okay, right? And so I started with that. And then if you ask me now, I would flip to the other side and say, well, look, there's an interesting question about consent. And can you actually give consent? And if you know that you're manipulating someone, then to my mind, even if they're saying yes and they're technically, they're not signing a piece of paper as such, but effectively, even if you could have got them to sign something, some sort of waiver form, that doesn't feel right either. But you raise an interesting point, because where's the line on that? And I'm not sure I've got a really good answer to that, because I think it's sort of, on the one hand, you would say, well, you have to be 1,000,000% certain that they wanted to do that. Well, that's an unrealistic goal. On the other hand, you don't want to be exploiting people, and it's very easy to kind of kid yourself. But they said yes, and there will be all sorts of situations in which they might be more likely. If alcohol would be an example, or certain environments with greater propensity. And so I think for me, the ethical thing comes down to: do you know what you're doing? Do you honestly believe that they are free will? And that's why I think I've been reading some fascinating things about people having relationships with their subordinates. Because actually there's a load of subliminal influence there, that even if you are the most moral individual ever, you can't overcome these environmental factors. So that's kind of where I come out. I'm not sure where you are on it, but
I don't know where I am either, Christian. Now that we're going into this deep, deep place, so relationships with subordinates and stuff, I had a child with my professor when I joined graduate school. He's a fabulous baby daddy. He's my colleague now. And his colleagues at the time said, she's not into you. She just likes you because you have power over her. This is his mean best friend. And the truth was, neither of us could know. It wasn't true. I absolutely adored him and was attracted and everything. But neither of us could know how much the power relationship played into that. I had a situation where I've always wondered, was this a romantic attraction kind of thing? I can't even imagine it. But Christian, when I met Jimmy Carter, he was in his 80s. We're having a picture taken. It's a Harvard event. And he puts his arm around my waist for the picture very politely. And he says, "You've got a great figure." And it was pre-Me Too. And so it didn't even cross my mind as like, oh, is an ex-president harassing me or something like that. It just sounded very sweet. But I was so excited to meet him already because I love the work that he's done after he left his presidency. Carter Foundation's amazing. And my vision clouded over and I almost fainted. I just physically was ready to faint with this 85-year-old man. And the only way I can explain it to myself is that it was his power.
Wow. And it's like, I'm glad it was that ex-president, not certain other ones, right? Because that would have been totally different. But yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. And I think, this is why I find what you do really interesting. As we look at behavioral science, for example, there's lots of people that kind of go, well, we'll bring some behavioral science to bear here, as if it's not going on anyway. And as you point out, and that's a great example, this stuff is influencing us all the time, whether we know it or not. And so we don't have a kind of neutral environment. We have to deal with the practicalities that are there. And of course, there isn't the parallel universe going, if we could just remove that one element. And so I think this is really fascinating, which is this stuff is happening all around us. And so what you're doing, and correct me if this is wrong, is kind of unpicking a little bit and going, let's just have a look and see. Let's try and freeze frame what's going on and look around, think about the dynamics that are at play here and recognize the ones that we control. And to your point, the ones that we can't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love to look just fundamentally at what are the building blocks here. And listeners, when you read my book, what you'll find is that it doesn't sound like rocket science because it's not science. It's science. And a lot of it is something that you'll feel like, yeah, that sounds familiar, resonates, like, yeah, these are things that I do. And then I just give you some extra layers of nuance so that you can do this a little more effectively, or you can teach it more effectively. And one example of breaking things down to their fundamental ingredients is charisma. So related to what we're just talking about.
Oh, I thought this was really interesting because I was like, oh, this is a chapter on charisma. And I think I approached it a little bit like I did the Neil Strauss books, right? I'm going to learn some really things and I'll let you go and explain them. But it's kind of like, some of it is like, oh, yeah, that's not that, and take this the right way, sophisticated, but it's really interesting.
And you already have it. So you're good. You're good. So charisma is weird because we do know it when we see it and we know it when we feel it. I tell a story actually in the book about going to a Prince concert and he takes the stage and he looks at us. I tell my friend, I think I'm about to faint. This was before the Jimmy Carter thing. And the stranger next to me falls down in a dead faint. And she literally fainted from Prince's charisma, even though he wasn't naturally charismatic at all. And he learned this over time. Initially, even when he got to be have a number one hit on the Billboard charts, he sucked as a performer so badly, Warner Brothers wouldn't let him go on tour. But he learns these things organically from Rick James. So I look at the academic research on charisma. It's fascinating to nerds like me who just want to understand it. But if you wanted to actually practice it, it's very hard, like complicated 7-factor model. Here are all the different things that you do. So I just started asking people, and I asked hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, name one charismatic individual. So you've read the chapter. Let's just see if you can do it anyway. Just gut check. Charismatic person comes into your head. Who would that be, Christian?
So I think Bill Clinton is charismatic.
Okay, let's just stop there because he's who pops into your head. And he's iconically charismatic, right? And just answering as quickly as possible, whatever comes out, what are 3 things about Bill Clinton that might be part of his charisma? What makes him charismatic? What does he do?
So I think eye contact, I think it's acknowledging you. I've never met him, but when I've watched, it's always super engaged. He kind of makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. Body language, or it's a combination of things, but I think it's focused on you.
Yeah. So exactly. This is one of the 2 key building blocks. And if you go and ask people, hey, name 3 characteristics of a specific charismatic person, you'll find about 80% of the characteristics they name fall into these 2 categories, with one being they're focused on you. It's the connection. And you don't have to be warm to connect with people. You can be very dark to connect with people, but it's a connection. And then the other big factor although it's a little bit smaller, is confidence. And so the combination of these two things is very high with powerful people, right? So we feel the connection, we feel the and they feel the confidence because they have all of this power. So for you, when you know, whoever you are already, you can practice charisma by reminding yourself to keep putting your attention on the other person. And when you do that, you become less self-conscious. And you can do that in simple ways, like reminding yourself to use that person's name. And if I'm going to remember now, Christian, to use your name a little bit more now, Christian. Is that okay, Christian?
Thanks, Zoe. That's hugely appreciated, Zoe.
So if you remember to use the other person's name, it also pings a part of their brain, the special part of their brain that gets activated only when they hear their name. So they're paying close attention to you. And another thing that's just very simple you can do is turn your statements into questions. So if there's an opinion that you're about to share, instead ask, so what do you think about? You're going to give your idea. Hey, what about? So just names, questions. And I talk about a bunch of other stuff in the chapter, but those are two great places to start.
There's a bit there that I really thought was interesting when you talk in the book about people that use I a lot in the way they communicate. And you make the point that is something you do when you are more junior, less confident. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was really interesting as a small point that actually it was one of the close things. Once you pointed it out, I started to think about when do I do that? I've just used that word. And when have I heard other people do it? And what you said made perfect sense, but it never occurred to me before. But I think it's a really simple example of how even just the small ways we frame comments can have a massive impact.
Yeah. So now I'll recommend a book that is the polar opposite of the game. And it's called The Secret Life of Pronouns. And it's by Professor James Pennebaker at the University of Texas, who's the guy who started a lot of this research on the relationship between pronouns and power. And since then, lots of other people have replicated it. But when we feel disempowered, our attention is on ourselves. Like when we're, cold, hungry, tired, it doesn't have to be about status at all. When we are scared, when we are sad, and when we're younger also, and this is also true for women, we tend to focus on ourselves because, first of all, it's hard to get out of our own experience if there's anything that's difficult about it. And second of all, when we have less power than the person that we're talking to, we need to care what they think of us. And so this is how women especially, but not just women, tend to use diminishers like, I kind of thought maybe I could be wrong, but, and we preface a lot of what we say with these diminishers to just make ourselves a little bit smaller so that we don't bother anybody. And I just had an idea, you're probably busy. And what we're doing is trying to relate. We're trying to show people we're not a threat and we want you to like us. And I'm sure, Christian, that when I talk to you that way, you do not perceive me as a threat. Right?
Right. No.
Probably also, but the liking doesn't come in the way that we want to.
And so, you say that, but clearly we've evolved societally to impose these norms on people. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about the book is you sort of unpick the behavioral science behind that and start to look at, well, why do these things happen? And I think it's really interesting that we have this innate ability. And when you point it out, I can kind of go, yeah, wow, I've got to avoid doing that because that's not particularly helpful. And I'm not even sure there's a single context in which what you've just done is the best strategy. I mean, there might be one if some sort of bizarre situation where I'm being held captive or something, I might want to put that on. But for general normal human interactions, I'm never going to want to adopt that as a strategy. And yet, as you rightly pointed out, and I think your comment around, women do this quite a bit. But I look at it and go, I'm not shy of confidence myself, and yet I find there are certain situations in which I'll do that. And so there is this interesting thing that we've.
Yeah, all of us do it sometimes, and actually, just on that one thing, Christian, when we are in leadership roles, still a lot of us do that because we don't want to be bullying anyone. It's all good intentions behind that thing. It's just that it's not panning out the way that we think. Yeah.
But why is it that we've got to that point? Because what I find fascinating, and it's a general sort of behavioral science question, I guess, but we do things that are not in our best interests. And yet, if I take the sort of evolutionary logic, it's kind of like, well, we're still here on this planet because our ancestors did some stuff that was, let's be crude about it, less dumb than some of the other, some of the other sort of. And yet, we do these things that it's almost like an act of self-sabotage.
Well, when you think about it from the evolutionary perspective, and I never have until you just asked this right now, but there's so many things that we do to not come across as a threat, and smiling is another one, right? Low status people smile more often than high status people. And people who live in more diverse cities smile more often than people who live in less diverse cities because we're interacting with strangers and people not like us. So we need to show that we're not a threat. So we do these things to show we're not a threat, and we're trying to survive. So our ancestors have developed a lot of ways of showing other humans, I mean you no harm, I mean you no harm. But that's very different from peak performance. We were evolved to survive. We were not evolved to be peak performers.
And one of the things I loved, by the way, in the book was you take some, you could read the thing through. This is a superb introduction to behavioral science. And so you take things like Kahneman's System 1 and System 2. And I loved it because I've never understood why somebody who's written a really, really groundbreaking book on the way we think and humans has chosen terminology that is about as distant from what humans. System 1 and System 2, that's not intuitive, that's not helpful. And you've kind of gone, well, I'm going to talk about the concepts, but I'm going to have my own. Can you just talk about a little bit about one, explain to us how you got to your terms for that? But two, I'm really intrigued as to why you felt the need to do that. Because I agree, I love the fact you've done it, but I think it's really interesting that you almost had to.
Yeah. And you get it because you talk about this stuff and teach this stuff. So the second part of the question I'll answer first, which is that you and I have both had the experience of we share System 1 and System 2 with people, and it makes sense to them in that moment when we're teaching it to them. But then afterward, can't remember which is which, right? Yeah, nobody remembers what is System 1 and System 2. So you can't call them System 1 and System 2. But I also want to make an excuse for Danny Kahneman, who is not the person who originated the terms System 1 and System 2. By the way, the baby daddy that I told you about is Kahneman's protege on a lot of this work, and they did a bunch of the System 1, System 2 together. Hi, Shane, if you're listening. Love ya. The reason that Danny Kahneman used System 1 and System 2 was Stanovich and West coined these terms before them. And the reason for those ridiculously abstract terms is that they were creating really a grand theory that was unifying all these other dual process theories, like left brain, right brain thinking versus feeling, intuition versus reason. All these kinds of theories, they said, basically, there's this general System 1 that's kind of the touchy-feely stuff. And generally, there's the System 2 that's the sort of thinky reason stuff. And so that we can bring everything else under it, we're going to make it as generic and abstract as possible. But that for the theory, it was very smart. For the practice, it is not effective.
Right.
So, I use the terms the gator and the judge. And once you have the image in your mind, and we're so visually oriented, right? And that is the System 1 gator part. Once you have the image of an alligator, this is the primal system that is in charge of maybe as much as 95% of all of your thinking and behavior. And it's like a reptile lurking under the surface and just waiting around opportunistically for threats or opportunities to come by. The key feature of the gator that is relevant for a lot of the influence stuff that I teach is that gators are so lazy. That's not the first thing that you think about a gator. But if you ever meet one and you're in a safe place and you get to watch it, you'll find out they barely move. They can go up to 3 years without eating anything. On average, they eat maybe 1 kilo of meat per week. The gators are so lazy, and they have a brain. They weigh in pounds, 1,000 pounds. They have a brain the size of a walnut. And yet they're very, very, very efficient when they do move. They're super fast. So in Danny Conan's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, this is the fast part. So alligator, you got it, primal. The judge is the conscious, slow, deliberative, effortful decision-making system where we evaluate facts and we make decisions based on facts. We think that we're in this mode a lot of the time, more than we are, but that's just because that's the conscious mode and the other mode is the unconscious mode. So the gator and the judge. There you have it.
And I like the judge thing because judges hang out. They preside over courtrooms. And I like that because it sort of suggested to me that this is something that doesn't happen all the time, right? You have to go into the court. So it's a special effort required. There's some robes involved. And I really like that imagery and very, very powerful. So, and actually you've convinced me because whenever I talk to people about it, I feel obliged to use the System 1 and System 2 terminology on the off chance that people might read Thinking Fast and Slow and not. But actually, you've just highlighted to me, I don't need to do that, right? The object here isn't to teach people the text, right? They can read them if they want to. They can work that out for themselves, but it's actually to get that message across.
Yeah. And maybe even the most important reason that I've shifted in this way is that I'm teaching people who then feel dumb for not remembering. And I never want to make people feel stupid. I always want to make them feel smart. So when I use silly terms like a gator and a judge, their experience is feeling smart instead of feeling dumb.
I love that. And can we just geek out for a second? Because you posted.
Well,
no, but we're going to double geek out. So some of the audience are going to go, "What is he talking about?" But I really want to capture this point because it's interesting. So Jonathan Haidt, all respect to great, right? He has this analogy of the elephant and the rider. And so,
so
the elephant is basically the gator in your equivalent, and the rider is the judge. Right? And you posted something on social media that it made me just go, whoa, which was you said, I think that's inappropriate. Oh, not disrespectful to him with his reasons, but you said, I think that's inappropriate. I want you to explain why, because I read it and I was just like, it had never occurred to me. And I loved it because I thought, oh, this is a simple way to do it. I can move away from System 1, System 2 to this elephant and the rider. And you dissected it. And I just want to capture that again because I thought it was really insightful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm very passionate about not using the terms the elephant and the rider, even though I am a fan of John Haidt, because the elephants are being abused and there's no consent there and their backs are physically being broken when people ride on them. So the idea of this lovely relationship between an elephant and a rider that you could imagine in a book like The Little Prince or something like this it just doesn't match reality at all. And it, even more importantly, doesn't match the reality that it's not the rider who is ultimately sending us in the directions we want to go. The scare quotes elephant is far more powerful than the rider. So it didn't even describe the relationship accurately between these two. Yeah, I'll stop there. But
so no, that's great. So there's now two. I don't want to use the word slide because I'm not a fan of using PowerPoint presentations, but there's two images that I've now got rid of, which is this. So thank you very much. You've helped it. Future people that I engage with are going to have a benefit. I'm going to use yours if that's okay. And obviously credit them to you.
And you can make up your own if you want. I'm not trying to get the whole world to use gator and judge. I just want to have the whole world be able to talk about this clearly with each other.
Right. And I think that takes me to a nice point around the book, because in many respects, you've highlighted the fact that some of this stuff is it's not rocket science. It's kind of obvious, particularly with when you've had it pointed out to you. And yet some of these things, back to the point around sort of con artistry, it feels like a little bit of a taboo subject. And it's not something that we naturally. Let's start with the education system, right? We don't teach kids we teach kids certain norms through things like fairy tales, but those tend to be quite. They're at their basic level incredibly helpful, but also there's some pernicious things in there as well. This isn't on the natural curriculum. And we don't kind of talk about those things. We shy away from it a little bit, and we have a lot of negative language associated with it. And I thought it was interesting because you were kind of blowing that open slightly and just going, well, I think we should talk about this and we should understand it. And so this is something that we shouldn't be. I don't want to go as far as saying it was sort of a little bit like talking about sex, but it's kind of like this is stuff that we haven't really discussed and nobody has. And I find that really interesting that, again, not only is it something that is kind of holding us back, it's friction in terms of us being our best selves, but there is a sort of reluctance to talk about it because of all these negative connotations.
Yeah, we don't want to feel like we're using somebody to try to get what we want, right? So there's that, and we definitely don't want anyone doing that to us. But there's also just all the years of training that we've gotten from our parents and our teachers to be good, be a good girl, be a good boy, have good student habits. And it's pernicious, not just because it keeps all of us back, but because there are tremendous inequities in who gets kept back more because of the different training we get from our parents. Jessica Calarco is a sociologist who did an interesting and tragic study where she was spying on kids in middle schools. And she was looking at which kids were the kids who asked for help, or they asked for extra time, or they asked for leniency when they were going to be punished. And she got the background on the kids to know what their parents' socioeconomic status was. Were they working class or were they middle class? She found that kids from middle class families were 7 times as likely to ask for help as kids from working class families. And then she went and interviewed these parents. By the way, she also observed the teachers to find that they were equally likely to say yes to all the kids. They just tried to say yes to everything kids asked them for, because that's what teachers do. But when she interviewed the parents from the middle-class families were saying they were teaching their kids that life and privilege is negotiable. And parents in the working class families were teaching their kids self-reliance. And they were teaching their kids, you have to work hard, you have to prove yourself. You might have to work twice as hard to prove yourself as that rich kid does, but you can do it. And so this was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy of working class kids working twice as hard, being the real working class.
Wow. Well, I mean, for all sorts of reasons, but if I look at, to deal with the challenges that we face as a species, we kind of need to be at the top of our game. And I formulate my whole human risk piece as a negative thing, which says human beings pose risk. We need to control that. But the flip side is human reward. How do we get the best out of them? And those two things are clearly interrelated. But as I look at the challenges we're facing, whether it's the climate or sort of social challenges or anything else, is we need people to be at their best. And all the things you're pointing towards, I read the book and thought this is really helpful for, I can do better out of this. Now, I'm incredibly privileged just by dint of my background and skin color and everything else. And I thought and I've learned a lot from that. And it's fascinating when you think about some of the social dynamics at play here, because you're absolutely right. There's a greater chance of having confidence and being able to influence people if you've had the right background. And so this points towards, I think it's wonderful to see it being exposed, but it's terrifying when you start to think about some of the things that it's constraining. And so for me, what I read as a sort of started as a kind of this is a useful self-help piece. Actually, I think you're making some really interesting societal points about the constructs. It's not just about money that restricts people. It's also about the cognitive constructs that are holding people back.
Thank you. And it's really not just our privileged or not privileged background. It really is the training that we get. And it's just, do we get it from our teachers or parents, or do we not get it? The training to ask and advocate, self-advocacy, right? There's other research looking at college students and looking at students from underrepresented minorities, Black and Hispanic students, who either went to public high schools where they lived, which in the US is funded by property taxes, so it's a disaster. Or they got scholarships and they went to private high schools. And they either way, they're looking at the people who ended up at places like Harvard, students who did really, really well either way. But and students are equally poor, their families, but the students who went to private high schools are asking and advocating for themselves, just like this elite white prep students, where the students who were just as smart, but they went to the public high schools, nobody taught them how to do this. And so they show up at college where everything is negotiable, but they have no idea. Christian, can I ask your advice about something? This is personal for me for this book, where when I'm sharing these ideas with people, so much of it is very simple. And that's absolutely true. And then when I get to teach people and they go put it into practice, they go, oh my God, I wasn't as comfortable as I thought. I didn't know as much as I thought. Actually, there are these nuances to it that I didn't understand. So I desperately want people to put some ideas from the book into the action and learn that for themselves. But how should I talk with people when the subject comes up of like, yeah, I've read this and it made a lot of sense. And these are the things I do. And I feel like, okay, but go out and do it. Like actually do the thing. And then I want to hear that you knew this already.
I think the answer to that, and thank you for asking, by the way, because I'm not sure I've got the answers, but I'll try and, for me, this is all of this stuff, what we're trying to do here, and that, the podcast and all my work is kind of taking stuff that feels theoretical, that is fascinating to all of us because we understand on a personal level. The simple thing is we need to give people entry points that feel easily accessible. And I think you do that in the stories that you tell. Because, you reference, and listeners to the show many listeners will know this, you reference Derren Brown. And if I look at Derren Brown, he is so far away. If we could sit there and go, how the hell did he do that? I would aspire to be, if I could do 1% of what he does, that would be, it's not a guidebook to how to become Derren Brown.
Right? Unfortunately, if I could write that, I would.
For me, I think that a lot of these things is around just small things and try them out and see if they work. And also accept that sometimes they might not. Right? And they might not because the environment, they might not because you screwed it up, because you misunderstood something, because it's not true to who you are, whatever, not authentic. So I thought there was a lovely bit at the end of the book where you basically said, tell me about your successes, right? And you've got there's an email address you've set up to get people to communicate. You go, well, okay, you've read the book. Now, what have you done with this? It's an interesting point, because I do think sometimes when you read these things and you go, it sounds really simple, and it's almost like, yeah, but that's for them. It's almost like you've got in a class system, you've got, well, that's not for the likes of us. And I think it's really interesting because I think this stuff is, right? It is available to us because this is not about, you don't have to have money to play in this space, right? You just have to understand it and try and do it. And I think there's a huge amount of fear around it. So for me, I think you're kind of doing the right things because you're pointing and saying, here's a simple example. And maybe actually, can you just tell the story about and I can't get the terminology right, but you did this exercise where you got your students to trade up stuff and start with something very small. So can you tell that story? Because I think that's a really good illustration of something that the end point sounds ludicrous, right? But the start point is commonly accessible to everybody. And some people did well and some people didn't. Can you just tell that story? Because I think that's a really interesting illustration of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I love this game that we play. It's called the Bigger and Better game. And you start with something relatively worthless like a paperclip. And you get to trade up as many times as you want. You have a time limit. So in our class, it's a week. And then a week later, you show up with your biggest, best thing. And you're trading up with anyone who's willing to trade with you. And you decide what's biggest, what's best. When students come back, they have such a wide range of biggest, best things. And, some of them have, they show up with a tube of toothpaste and oh, okay, great. Well, actually, you've multiplied the value by at least 10 or more, right? Good job. And then some of them show up with weird things, someone came with the piece of marble from Saddam Hussein's palace. But I don't even know. I don't know what to make of it. But the biggest, best, absolutely craziest one was two students who traded up between a Monday and a Thursday in 10 trades from a paperclip to a Volkswagen Jetta from a local car dealership. And the way that they were able to do this magic, and this is the most dramatic one, but they're not alone at all. We've had a lot of other great things, lots of vacations. We had tree, many other wonderful things. The way that they're able to do this is by framing this as not a transaction. What do you want to trade for my paperclip? Can I have something that's maybe worthless to you, but better than this? They're inviting a relationship and approaching with warmth and playfulness and saying, hey, here's this game. Here's how it works. This is our vision. So for these students, their vision was to get a car, and neither of them needed a car or could use it. One was moving to Manhattan and one didn't have a driver's license, and they wanted to give it to a refugee family, which they did. So the refugee family comes to our school, pick up the car, and the mom has been commuting 2 hours each way on the bus, and she's going to get to spend more time with her family. And when they're sharing this vision and this goal and this beautiful frame of, hey, do you want to be part of this thing together? it was so motivating that it was easy for them to find these 10 people to trade with them. They were ready to call every car dealership in the state, and they only had to call one.
It's almost like unbelievable. And yet you can sort of see how it can happen. And I thought it was interesting that the story, because it feels like there's a lot of luck involved. And let's use the obvious pun that you'll have heard a million times. A lot of chance involved, right? What's interesting is that you unpack it. It's a really good illustration of you can make your own luck to an extent, right? I mean, it could have gone hideously wrong. And of course, we're looking at this is survivorship bias. So we're looking at the one that succeeded, and there'll be a ton of people that might have had even bigger visions that failed. But I think it's interesting because it just sort of illustrates that stuff can happen. And we do have more power and influence than we realize. But I think if you said to the average person, you can do this, they would say, no, I can't. Right? They'd find a million. You would almost cognitively block it.
Right. And they wouldn't try it. And that's why we're not as influential as we could be and we should be, is because we don't think that we're going to succeed, or we think that we're going to annoy people. So we don't even try. Do you know this study by Richard Weissman? So he has a book that's called The Luck Factor.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember the study with newspaper photographs? It's cool. This is one of my favorite. I should have gone. I do, but for my listeners, can you remind us? Oh yeah. That's a ninja move. Nice.
Yeah, I should have just done it. I gave it away. But anyway, for my listeners, could you let them know?
For the listeners, there is a study where Richard Weissman wants to figure out what is it that contributes to people feeling lucky and maybe even being lucky. And he sets it up so that he first does phone interviews, asking people a number of different things. And one of them is, how would you characterize yourself on the scale from extremely unlucky to extremely lucky? And then he only brings people into the study who say that they're either extremely unlucky or extremely lucky. Each of these people comes into the experiment by themselves, and he gives them a sheaf of newspaper and says, okay, I'll be back in a minute. Count the photographs in this newspaper and then tell me how many photographs there are. So the unlucky people look through the newspaper, they count the photographs, and they tell him there's 16 photographs. And he says, okay, thank you. And he pays them £1 or whatever they get for the study. The lucky people, these are self-proclaimed lucky people, as they're flipping through the newspaper, they see this half-page ad that he's taken out in the newspaper that says, mention this ad to the experimenter for a chance to win £50. And they notice it because they were open to opportunities and they were paying more attention to the world around them. And they also had to have the idea that they could be lucky. So they not only saw the thing and weren't like, oh yeah, enter the lottery, whatever. And they actually reached out. So much of the difference between people, I believe in luck, absolutely. And a big part of good luck is being open to opportunities and then gently seeding opportunities, where a really simple thing that you can do that most of us don't is just tell everyone what you want. Just tell people what you want, and not necessarily that you're asking them. Like, do you have something, like, can we ask your listeners right now, because I know we're putting you on the spot, but like something in your life that maybe some listener right now could do for you, possibly.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, look, if I look at what I'm doing here, the business that I run and what I do, right, comes from it doesn't come from an intelligent, I've sat down and written a business plan, right? It is, I've looked at the world and gone, I've been part of this thing, or I've just gone, the way we do compliance, the way we think about influencing employees, it sucks, right? And it's not fit for purpose. And I have this vision and mission that I want to drive this thing through, and I want to get big companies to do it. So I can work with people, I can work with business. I want some CEO somewhere to grab this thing and go, I would love to play with this. And so I would here's my ask, right?
Yeah.
Is I want to be connected to a Tim Cook or someone of that kind of thing to go, let's have a conversation. Let's see if we can do something. And let's give you the biggest laboratory, not necessarily the biggest in terms of the number of people, but here's a massive laboratory. And we're not just going to do this kind of as a little side project in anything. We're going to try this in the company as a whole. We're going to put a load of effort behind it, right? So I want that connection to a C-suite person that is committed to this, to trying to do something a little bit different, who recognizes this human risk dynamic.
Great, I love it. I love that you put yourself out there. And that's a real dream that you have, and you made it concrete. So that person who's listening and who loves your podcast already is like, oh, well, maybe that's something that I should think about, right? Or that person's brother or employee, whoever it is. A lot of the magic that we create in this way comes through referrals, just like you asked for.
Okay, so let's flip it around, Zoe. What do you want?
I would just love Barack Obama to read my book. And I don't have a personal connection to him. I have like some people who know him like little bits. And even though I teach people how to ask, I feel shy about trying to make a super busy person read my book. But when I was writing the book, the person that I imagined as your target reader when you're writing is Barack Obama back in his 20s when he was a community organizer in Chicago. And those are the kind of people that I wanted to empower with this book.
So you want him to read it, so in effect so the younger him would find out about it. So you want the Barack Obamas of the 2022.
And then time travel.
Right.
I think he did great. But yeah, I've just been so inspired by him and his style of influence as well, that if he would just, even like, if he doesn't like it, I don't want him to have to read the whole thing, but just like have the book there in front of him and he opens it and flips to a chapter to see, like, is this something that he would be curious about or that would be helpful? So there's my wish.
And I'll tell you what I think is interesting is that when you've got someone like that has, I mean, clearly he's rehearsed a lot, and it's this not all natural talent, but he's got some natural things that he's picked that are part of his personality and the way he presents himself. And one of the things I find really interesting about behavioral science is sometimes it's not a case of me learning something new, but it's me backfilling and going, oh, I now understand why that works. Typically, it's when something's gone really badly wrong, right? I've screwed something up, or I've been conned, right? And I kind of go, I want to know, why did that happen, right? So I can explain my own idiocy, or I can even acknowledge my own success wasn't necessarily, but I'm kind of trying to backfill the thing. And I wonder whether someone like that actually might be quite interesting, not from the perspective of he is going to learn. I mean, I'm sure everybody will learn something, but there might be, for him, it might just be a case of retrofitting and going, oh, okay, I now have some language around the thing I was doing, and I have an explanation for it. And I think that's one of the other joys is sort of sometimes we get lucky by, pun again intended, Zoe, chance, right? And we've tried something intuitively feels right, but you almost have a personal replication crisis because you're like, I don't know what the laboratory could do. What was it that I was doing? And so I think some of the things that you were talking about in there, I kind of recognize in myself, and we've all got the, I mean, you talk a lot about sort of the pressures on us. So, offers that expire soon play to a certain dynamic. We know that, right? So timing, oh my God, I better rush there because scarcity is going to, and we sort of know that intuitively, but it's quite nice to have someone unpick it a bit and just go, let me just tell you what's going on in your head so that you can either just enjoy that moment or you can be wary of it if someone's trying something on. So I wonder whether that might not be something as well for him.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think a lot of leaders who are reading this book, because of the leaders that I've been teaching so far, will want to think that they know everything in the book and give it to the people who they lead. And that's great too.
Right. I know all this. You people should read this. Right?
Go right ahead. I have no problem with that.
But that's cool. Yeah, right. All right. Sales are sales. Who cares? If Kim Jong-un wants to buy a few copies of it.
No. Kim Jong-un, you do not get a book. It's being translated in 22 languages. Korean is one of them, but we are not sending it to you.
Right, it's staying south of the DMZ because, frankly, not right, exactly.
Yes.
Wow, time with you, as I knew it would, has just flown. Before we go, what's next on the radar? What's the next? I mean, I know you're incredibly busy, right? You've got teaching to do, your research, you are promoting the book and doing kind of things like this. But what's next on the mission?
The mission is fighting the climate crisis, saving the world. And actually, I'm donating half of the money that I get from this book to organizations that are working on that problem. So the first one is 350.org. I'm a huge fan of this global network of climate activists trying to move us away from fossil fuels and toward renewable energy. And to me, the joy and the reward of becoming more influential is that we get to tackle bigger and bigger problems, and we get to work with other people who are tackling these huge problems. So I feel super lucky to get to work with great people working on big problems. And I'll just mention it's my students who influenced me in this way. So I had been teaching them for probably 6 years, where it was just a slow, accretive shift toward, yes, yes, there's global warming, and I realize it's a problem, toward maybe I should be doing something about it, toward, wow, I think I have to be doing something about it now. And I'm bringing this up just to reinforce the idea that becoming influential also means being influenceable.
What a great mission. Because I agree with you. I've kind of come to that realization as well. And you sort of go, well, I kind of know I ought to do something. And it's like, this is a good thing. And I'll change, I'll tweak things.